Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this was a week of surprises. On Monday, Jefferson Parish Councilmember Chris Roberts suddenly resigned. And who would have thought that they would ever hear that the Advocate has bought the Times-Picayune, as was announced on Thursday? We'll look at these stories tonight, as well as an investigation of the Lieutenant Governor's expenses and a low-profile but very important election coming up tomorrow. Our Future Watch segment probes the status of the now rundown former Lindy Boggs Medical Center. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Gordon Russell, managing editor for investigations, the New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And we go over to Gordon first because Chris Roberts just suddenly stepped down, council member at large at JP Council.
Yeah, so this was it was a sudden resignation, but at the same time, I guess I should say there was a pretty public and long-running federal investigation into him. So in that sense, it wasn't a complete surprise. The timing took a lot of people by surprise, though. But he's been frank about the fact that there's been a federal investigation into him. And we know that this started in part because he had not filed tax forms for several years. And it appears, from what our sources tell us, that as the feds got into this investigation, they discovered bigger financial problems and a gambling problem, and that has led to a bigger public corruption investigation. However, I should say it's not at all clear that they've established any actual corruption, but they have looked into a number of cases where either Councilman Roberts did something for somebody and they're trying to determine whether he might have gotten paid for that, or they're looking also at cases where he received money or took a loan or bounced a check or something like that, and they're trying to see if he did something as a public official for that person. So, you know, the expression quid pro quo, something for something else. In some cases, they have a quid and not a quo, and in other cases, they have a quo and not a quid, and I'm not sure that they've got a nexus between any of those.
But they must have something for him to resign.
Well, I mean, I think it's likely that he's going to face some kind of charge related to his taxes, if nothing else, and possibly there could be some of these financial problems could lead to some other charge, potentially like a fraud charge, but not, as far as we know to this point, they have not established any evidence that he sold his office, so to speak.
It was interesting because it was a surprise, like you said, in the timing, but newsrooms across the city have been kind of bracing for this for a long time, having conversations with him about it. Your paper, our station, we've all done reports about some of the allegations over the years, and he's addressed them and responded to them and said he didn't think it was going to lead to anything repeatedly. And we've had kind of like Chris Roberts watches going where we thought something was about to come down and then it didn't. And then nobody seemed to be prepared for this one when it happened.
Well, he's known as a very open, sort of voluble guy who talks to the press a lot. He's been on the council 16 years, and he's addressed this probably more forthrightly than most people, most public officials.
He's one of the rare people who will walk up to you and say, "What are you looking for today? Do you need? I'm here if you need me."
But at the same time, communication with him was like shut down when this first came down. Couldn't get in touch with him. His phone was out. His social media was shut down.
He took down his social media profile. But typically, he, unlike many public officials who are under scrutiny, he would actually address. Often, their lawyers tell them, "Don't say anything about this. Leave it to me." And he actually has commented on it.
And he has been a long-time public official, really half his life.
Yeah, he's 41, and I believe he began in public office at 21 as a school board member in Jefferson Parish. He's been on the council now 15 or 16 years. He was coming into his final months as an at-large councilman. He was term limited out of that, but there was talk that he was going to run for his old district seat again, which he would have been allowed to do.
Well, for the last re-election bid, some of these tax issues, wasn't it, came up during that election cycle. He was reelected.
Yes, that's exactly right. And he had reasons for, he gave reasons for his tax problems. He said he had a business that went belly up, and he had reasons for that. And he said he was owed money. I think he was due a refund, and that he wasn't paying his taxes until he got that squared away. So he did at least address. I can't speak to the exact veracity of all that, but he did address those
But
issues.
he didn't address the gambling.
He did not address the gambling.
And that's something that sort of piqued the interest of the feds.
We're told that's a big red flag for federal investigators, because when they find out that you might have a gambling problem, they feel like there's no telling what you might do, depending on the extent of the problem. That people who are desperately, and I'm not in a position to diagnose how severe this problem might be, of course, but people sometimes do extreme things when they have a gambling problem.
So that's something that will bring on an investigation, if likely to, at any rate, if you're an
Yeah.
elected official.
And I think it's really led to an extensive investigation, but again, I don't know if it's borne fruit of the kind that they were searching out.
So his resignation is effective immediately. And what
Yes.
happens now to that seat on council?
They are appointing a new member, and that person will not be allowed to run for re-election, and there'll be an election this fall.
And one thing is obvious, there's going to be big changes in Jefferson Parish government because there'll be a new person in his seat. Cynthia Lee Chang is probably running for Mike Inney's seat, and so the two at-large positions will be vacant. Mike Inney's seat, there's a good chance that there'll be somebody new there, and so you could have a new parish president and the two at-large members, and perhaps one of the district council members will be running for one of the at-large seats, and so there'll be a district seat. And so you might even have a majority of the council.
Yeah, there's going to
new.
be a lot of musical chairs over there for sure, and this will just add to that.
Okay, all right, Gordon, thanks a lot. Now, the thing that really rocked people this week is that the Advocate has purchased the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. So what does this mean?
It means it's been a baffling story. I mean, you think back into June of 2012 when the story first broke, and all the things that happened. And for one thing, if you go back then, and if what it seemed like would happen would indeed have happened, and that is that the Picayune would have gone down to 3 times a week, and if there'd have been nobody else moving in the market, what if the Advocate had not come into the market? What if we would have gone the last 7 years as being the largest city in the country without a daily newspaper? What kind of a disaster would that have meant? And it's more than getting newspaper. It means having X number of reporters who are out on beats, discovering things, and so you lose that. I mean, daily newspaper is really part of how a community works, and so without that, in a sense, though, when the Advocate moved in, and this was the Manship family out of Baton Rouge, and once that moved in, we got the better of both worlds, and that we had 2 newspapers, and so for a while, at least we were the largest city in the country with 2 newspapers competing against each other, and that was a fairly healthy thing to have, even though from a business point of view it wasn't healthy, but from a consumer's point of view it was. Had the Advocate not moved in, there'd probably been some startup smaller newspapers. We saw a few of those anyway, but not the kind of competition or nothing large that we had, and so in that sense it's been good. But the what's going to happen now is going to be more in keeping with what's going on around the rest of the country, where you have one daily newspaper.
Well, I got to say, I looked at it from more of an emotional point of view. Both Gordon and I were at the Times-Picayune in June 2012 when all of that went down. And I thought about the journalists at the Times-Picayune, because it was a terrible experience, as Gordon can attest. He was in a management position and I was a reporter, and so we kind of had different experiences, but it was the day that 200 reporters were laid off at the Times-Picayune in 2012 was a terrible day. And, I just think about those guys and gals over there who now have, 60 days to find new jobs, hopefully at the combined newspaper run by John George's organization. But a lot of them will probably not be able to get jobs there and may have to leave the area, and families are being upended.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, anytime something like this happens, you hate to see journalists lose jobs, and I think the more journalists we have working in a community, the better. I guess I would say that the newspaper war, such as it was, artificially elevated the number of journalists who were employed in this town, and that was a good thing. And it lasted longer than a lot of us might have predicted. It's been going on 7 years now, and but you kind of thought that it wouldn't go on forever because, as Errol said, you look around and how many American cities have 2 newspapers. The economics of newspapers have been pretty grim for the last 15 years, and the pie just gets smaller every year, and of course New Orleans isn't a particularly large market, and it's not a particularly wealthy market, so the idea that this would go on forever was probably naive, although I think a lot of us had just gotten accustomed to it going on forever.
But that's to the credit of your boss, John George's, in terms of the dedication. I think if people had to guess when that first happened, they were thinking, well, what's he really care about the media, and is this really something that he's dedicated to, and how long is this really going to last from the Advocate's perspective? I think the thing that threw so many people in our town was, wait, the Advocate's saving the Times-Picayune.
Right.
That's the crazy kind of turnabout that is happening here.
And you got to acknowledge it was John Georges who saved the Advocate from when they first moved in, because when the Advocate first moved in from Baton Rouge, it was kind of lost for a few months.
It was mostly Baton Rouge
yeah,
News
yeah,
with a New
it's-
Orleans
Right, I mean, the
cover
initial
page.
foray into New Orleans was a little bit more timid, I guess, and it was more of a low cost. It was let's have a daily newspaper. Before John George's bought it, it was let's have a daily newspaper, but it was a small staff, and it was just intended to.
I think something I was really telling though was like when 2 weeks ago when the Advocate won the Pulitzer Prize, and the people, I think as far as you led that team, didn't you? And so you from the Picayune, I think most of the reporters that worked with you, formerly from the Picayune.
The 3 primary reporters on it, as well as the graphics artists, were all Picayune alums. Yeah.
Okay, and so this was Picayune talent that was able to come together, but the Advocate gave the opportunity for it to come together. And this was more than a story that was just something to read about. This was something that the story translated into state law, into a constitutional amendment. This was the one about the unanimous verdicts on jury trials. And so that shows the impact that the media and reporting can have. And that was a great example of it.
Well, the other thing is the editor and the publisher of this new combined paper were the 2 people, Peter Kovacs and Dan Shea, who were both laid off, blared in the New York Times the day that the Times-Picayune news came down in 2012. They lost their jobs. They're now in charge of the new combined paper.
And many
That's
learned
pretty
that they were
impressive.
going to lose their jobs in the New York Times
Correct,
article, right?
exactly.
So back to now this combination of the 2. How do we think how is this going to look? What's the paper going to be called? We know that they say it's going to be a 7-day-a-week home delivery.
Well, they're saying right now, and Gordon may know things that we can't say, but they say they're going to use both titles originally. I mean, initially. My guess is, though, at some point, it's going to be called the Times-Picayune, because that's the name that's been around for a while. They might call it the Picayune Advocate for a while. But if I think that word is going to survive in some form.
And I think NOLA.com survives it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think NOLA.com will survive because it still gets significantly more web traffic than our website does, and it's sort of a go-to web address. And I think I can't speak to I don't know the answer to what the thing will be called and the newspaper will be called, but I would expect that the name Picayune in particular, since it's so distinctive, that would be preserved for forever. It sort of evokes New Orleans. It's a really distinctive brand name. Anyone around the country who hears Picayune thinks New Orleans.
One thing that was healthy that came out of this, and it may have happened anyway, but we never saw it before this, was the partnership between newspaper and television station. Like the Advocate and Channel 4 were partners, and the Picayune and Channel 8.
What do you mean were?
We're partners. What?
What do you mean were? We still are.
It's still present. It's definitely.
Have been and may always be. Okay. But with the first time we saw that sort of thing, and that seemed to be a good. I mean, you 2 are examples of that. Has that worked well for you, having the newspaper?
It's been terrific, and I mean, for me, it's a great opportunity to work with old colleagues like David and Mike Perlstein and Katie Moore, who's not an old colleague, but who's terrific to work with. And I feel like it's made sense in a contracting business because we're able to help each other with reporting, and we don't really lose anything. I mean, their primary financial model is television, and ours is print, and we compete a little bit online, and we have a way to sort of work that out. And
Some of my favorite stories that I've done at Channel 4 have been in conjunction with the Advocate and with their reporters and just working together, and I think we're stronger for it.
And there's an added bonus to just a bigger audience seeing your story, and some stories are told better on TV and some are better in print, but if you can tell them in both places, you sometimes get a little more bandwidth for your story.
So in New Orleans, we'll continue to have the print presence with a 7-day-a-week delivery now of this newspaper,
Yes.
but also the digital presence right there. Are you finding that more and more people are starting to consume online?
I mean, that's always, every year that goes,
goes up.
more. Yeah. Now, of course, we've gone to this metered, I'm not supposed to use the word paywall, but we're going to this system where you have to pay after a certain number of articles, and so that's going to change that somewhat, but I don't think it's going to drive people away from digital. Hopefully it'll make that part of the business a little more profitable, because that's been one of the things that's really hurt the news business over the years is giving away the product for free.
So however it's delivered, still the goal is excellent journalism, which you guys have been achieving, and congratulations to you personally.
Oh.
We had John Zimmerman on a couple of weeks ago to offer
Thank you. Appreciate that.
A great honor. Okay, thanks a lot, Gordon. David, over to you. You've done some stories about a lieutenant governor and how he travels around being transported by state troopers.
Right, yeah, I heard that he was getting the state troopers all the time, but he was also claiming a stipend, monthly payment of $700 to use his own vehicle, but people hadn't seen him driving his own vehicle, so I started looking into it. I asked him about it, and he gave some conflicting answers, saying at one point that the troopers drive him everywhere, and then at another point saying that, in almost like maybe 10 seconds later, saying that it's only part-time. And so I got a lot of documents, public records, that showed that, while he was insisting that he doesn't, that he spends a lot of his own money and he doesn't charge taxpayers for a lot of travel, it showed that he was traveling quite a bit and charging taxpayers quite a bit for meals and other travel expenses. And so really that's what it was about, looking at his use of the troopers, including for campaign events, including to go meet with his campaign consultant, having the trooper wait around for 4 hours in the vehicle while he has a meeting with his campaign consultant. And so I just wanted to ask him, is that an appropriate use of state police resources? And, he believes that it is, and he, maintains that he can do both, even though that's been an issue with other politicians in the past.
And you followed him around over a certain time period. What was it, a few months or something?
Yeah,
you sort of kept showing up to ask him a question.
Right, exactly. We started hearing about it in the fall when his campaign started, and so we had, documentation of him using the trooper at a campaign event all day long in the fall. The other issue was that there was some discrepancies with public records. His calendar that was finally provided to us after waiting for over a month, and the public records request, they're supposed to provide it within a couple days. They finally provided it, and it was redacted. It was changed so that references to the troopers, references to campaign events were all missing.
Because you had the unredacted version.
Correct. And the unredacted version showed that, on days that he didn't have any public business on his calendar, he was using the troopers to go to golf tournaments for his campaign, to go to the jet service in Baton Rouge for an unknown reason, to go to visit a personal home in New Iberia, things like that.
Well, is this a security detail? Does he say it's security, or
Yes.
how does that work?
Yes, it's a security detail, and the irony is that, by statute, the governor gets 24/7 security detail. The governor can then agree, although there's no written document that shows this, to give the lieutenant governor some amount of security. So he says that the state police recommended that he get full-time security, but he says that he refused that. So he says he doesn't get full-time security, he only gets part-time, and yet he's also, so that he can claim this $8,400 a year stipend for the use of his personal vehicle, and yet everywhere we went and every time we saw him, he was with the trooper.
So you'll be looking into seeing if this has changed in any way?
Yes,
down the line?
yes, we'll follow up.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. Over to you. people might remember Mercy Hospital, which ultimately became the Lindy Boggs Medical Center, and it has been empty since Katrina, and it's a mess right now.
It is a mess. If you drive through that area of Mid-City, there is so much growth and so much happening at the top point, if you want to call it that, of the Lafitte Greenway. You've got new apartments, new townhomes, new bars and restaurants, it's beautiful, but for the Lindy Boggs Medical Center, which on the outside, the developers of it will admit it's an eyesore. It's one of Joe Yeager's investments, Joe Yeager's group. He's working on developing it, and they told me on the phone this week that they cannot keep vagrants and graffiti artists out of that building, try as they might. They keep resecuring it. They are having a hell of a time keeping it clean while they do the work on that building. And they're meeting actually next month with the Mid-City Neighborhood Association to talk about their plans moving forward. Neighbors are frustrated by the way it looks, obviously. They want something to be done there. They're eager to see it back in commerce, and work is actually underway to get it back in commerce. We reported on this show back in 2017 that they had grants to do some EPA-type remediation in there, both asbestos and underground storage tanks. That was completed. After that, it took 6 to 9 months to empty the building of all the old contents. It's a complete shell, it's completely gutted, and it's ready to go. We reported at that time in 2017 also that the best use for it probably would be some sort of elder care. So right now the developers are pursuing a site operator to do elder care, some combination of assisted living, independent living, and memory care all in one. In the next 90 days, they should have selected that site operator, because that operator is really going to have to consult with, well, how much space do you need for this nursing? The developers are like, that's just not in their wheelhouse. They need to select the site operator first. Then they'll have to do a full architectural design and go through the approvals on that. So there's no real timeline yet for when it won't look like it looks now. Just know that it won't for terribly much longer. The building's eligible for historic tax credits. They are working with the mayor's office, and say that the mayor's office has been a very good partner in development in terms of trying to secure the financing to make the deal go through.
So it is the same structure
It is
that
the
we
same
see that's going to
structure.
remain. They're not going to be leveling that. They're using that existing
They're
structure.
using that structure. It is 260,000 square feet of space, and it's in the works. It's just not rapid,
As
and
you
that's
said,
frustrating.
It's right there at the head of the Lafitte Greenway, which if you haven't been by the Lafitte Greenway like in the last year or so, you're going to wonder where
The
you
new
are.
Deutsches
It's
House,
so totally
the new
different.
everything there is just new. It's new and happy and well maintained,
vibrant,
and
There's a number of properties like this around. I mean, the Navy base, the old Navy base at the Poland Avenue, that also Joe Yeager is a developer for, that has sat there.
I think a
vacant for
lot
so
of these
long.
projects they take time. I mean, when you talk about architectural review and concept designs and lining up financing, we can sit here and say, well, that's easy, just get it done. It's months and months and months of back and forth and meetings and approvals, and then things fall apart, and then they get picked back up again. It's underway. I just can't report on any kind of timeline, except that they are working on it. Within the next 90 days, we should know who that operator will be. And then you'll see things happening a little bit faster as they go through designs, but they say they want to get it right the first time.
Right. Well, it certainly will be a welcome change, and I know the folks who live near that, there's a port of embarkation on Poland Avenue. It can't come soon enough to
Right,
have
I mean,
change
it's
over
the
there.
same
It's
issue
really
with,
derelict.
and people breaking in there and living
You
there.
put up
and all that.
fences and you do whatever. I mean,
And it still happens.
It still
All right,
happens.
Don, thanks a lot. Errol, let's take a look at elections that are coming up this weekend.
Well, there are elections throughout the states. They're all small elections. They tend to be referendum and millage renewal type elections. If there are in Orleans and Jefferson, St. Tammany tomorrow. If you're wondering about going to the Jazz Fest and saying, well, I don't have time because I don't have time to vote, go vote, because it's going to take no time to do this. There's not going to be any lines. I can almost guarantee you that when you go there, you'll walk in first. If there's any delay, it might be from the voting commissioner having fallen asleep or something. This could be a long, lonely day for him. But the most interesting one, and most people talk about, is the one in Orleans Parish. And that it's unusual in that it's 4 recreational groups, City Park and Audubon Park and the Recreation Department and Parkway. And it's the millage renewal, but what's different is that City Park is being put into the mix this time, and for the first time ever, we'll get some millages from the city. So this is millages that have existed, and the loser in this is Audubon Park. They're going to lose some of their millage so that City Park and these others can get some. But Audubon Park supports it because they're almost finished paying off the aquarium, and that millage is being used for that. So once that's done, the remaining millage they get, they can use for other things. And so in a sense, it helps them also.
And they tried to get an additional millage in, what was that, 2 years ago? And it went
Failed.
down
A little bit
bad.
longer than that.
Well,
Went down really
I
badly.
think that's what people say really kind of triggered this, because Audubon Park supposedly just sat down and reconsidered how we do this and what our public perception is, and so they became more of a game player on this. And so what happened 2 years ago
Let's take a
really
look at the
affected
others
this.
quickly.
Also in Jefferson Parish, you have several things. A renewal for forensic medical facilities, a new millage for school districts, and in the Timber Lane neighborhood. This you see in a lot of neighborhoods where a certain assessment for improvements, and that's in Jefferson Parish. And so that's in parts of Jefferson Parish. And then in St. Tammany, there's a runoff for the in Covington for council. There's two school districts that have millage renewals. Same thing with fire protection and also recreation. So it's a lot of these little type of elections, but it's the kind of stuff, like they're 10-year renewals, they're 20-year renewals, they're paying the bills for the next couple of decades, and they're really important.
They are
even,
really important.
Even though the turnout's going to be, abysmal. But
They're important for services,
Sure.
and then also just personally how much taxes you pay. So go vote. Hey, time to look ahead.
Today, a woman named Catherine Pugh, who's the mayor of Baltimore, resigned. And the significance of that is that she is the one who appointed Michael Harrison to be the police chief. Then, okay. Now, there's no reason to believe there's any connection between her resigning and Michael Harrison. She resigned because of some kind of alleged scam with children's books that she was publishing. But it's kind of feel uneasy to have quit your job and moved to another city, and then the person who appointed
your
you
boss.
has left office.
Right. Okay, thanks. E. Gordon.
So today we had another boil water advisory brought to you by a broken water main that apparently dated to 1905, according to the Sewerage and Water Board. This is surely going to spark more talk of the need to spend more to repair our creaky infrastructure. And Councilwoman Helena Moreno has said she wants to have more of a study of where this money's, where our tax money's going.
All right. Dawn?
Speaking of money, Tuesday is Give NOLA Day. It's an activity sponsored by the Greater New Orleans Foundation, where you are encouraged and invited to give freely to a lot of the programs that provide good services in the city and their incentives and things like that.
And of course,
Giving.
WYES would really appreciate it if you consider us. David?
Dawn mentioned the Lindy Boggs and what's going to happen there. My colleague Mike Pearlstein did a great story last night about a standalone ER that never happened for East Jefferson Medical Center on veterans, and questions about what they're doing because the parish is paying, or that entity is paying lease payments every month and not using it.
Okay. Interesting.
Right.
All right. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.